So without further ado, I want to talk a little bit about tonight's program. We're very fortunate to have two exceptional speakers that will talk to us about the importance of substance abuse and addictions. We're seeing in the news a lot of information about the opioid epidemic and about the legal ramifications of marijuana in our states and our country. So tonight we have Justin Wolfe, who is a licensed clinical professional counselor. He is a certified alcohol and drug counselor and a certified rehabilitation counselor. Completed his master's in counseling with a specialization in rehabilitation from the Adler School of Professional Psychology and completed his addiction training at College of DuPage. Clinical therapist at Linden, outpatient at Addiction Services. So we're very pleased and heard such wonderful things about him, so we want to thank him for his time. And then following that will be Todd Fink, certified alcohol and drug counselor, graduate of Georgetown University, a mindful instructor. He did actually come present to us in one of our earlier sessions. I told him it's not like Saturday Night Live, you don't get more kudos the more you present here, but we are very happy to have him here this evening. Co-founder of the internationally acclaimed music group, the Giving Tree Band. As a musician, counselor, and speaker, writer, lifelong student of meditation, Todd works fervently to educate individuals, organizations, and communities on the benefits of healthy and mindful living. So, without further ado, you don't want to hear me speak anymore. Justin Wolfe, please come to the stage. Thank you very much for coming. Let's give a round of applause for that.
Alright, can everybody hear me? Am I loud enough? I figured I didn't need a microphone, so we'll just roll with that. Okay, so like you said, my name is Justin Wolfe. I'm a clinical therapist at Linden Hospital, the Adolescent Addictions Program. I've been there for about 5.5 years. Before working there, I worked in a residential treatment program for adolescents that have had substance use disorders and were also on probation. That facility was called Braxis. So that's kind of my background, kind of coming into this. And I think this is such a big topic if we're talking about this, because it just seems like this is blowing up everywhere. And everybody's kind of like, where does this start? How does this begin? And I think that's kind of like the conversation we need to start having, because a lot of our focus is generally focused on the end of the tape. How did we get here? How did it end up like that my kid was using this? Why is this weird tower in the bathroom? What is happening? How do we end up here? And if we had just known, like I hear that all the time, if I just known what to look for, we might have been able to stop this. So, as I'm going through this, I'm going to be talking pretty fast. There's a lot of material I want to cover with you, and I think we have a question and answer time afterward. And after that, if you guys have any questions or you want to get in contact with me, my contact information is up here, and you can feel free to touch base with me afterwards. So, without further ado, where does this all begin? And a lot of times it begins in a very, safe or controlled place. Parents' basements, like younger or older siblings, kind of introducing their younger siblings to this. And a lot of times, like some very horrible things happen in these places that are perceived as safe. And a lot of times parents think they're doing the right thing by controlling this and saying, hey, I know they're going to do it, at least I can keep them in my supervision. But a lot of people get really sick in these places where it's perceived as safe. And the earlier this stuff gets activated in the brain, the earlier this is introduced to the adolescent, the earlier they learn, wow, I like this feeling, and I didn't have to do anything to create this. All I had to do was use something. And if you have that family history, we'll kind of get into those risk factors of what put people at place for addiction. That could be a life-changing moment for somebody. The other thing to kind of get into this is that this is a young person's disease. And I think we're starting to get a lot more focus now, recognizing that this starts at a young age. And the data shows the longer that we can prevent somebody from using, even if it's just 1 year, there's a huge difference in the possibility of them not developing a dependence or an addiction to a substance or behavior. So for every year, what's that? You need mic? Yeah. Right. It's fine. Okay. All right, perfect. Thank you. So, and I also think another, that's loud. But I also think another really important factor to kind of keep in your mind as we're going through this is that the reason very different than the reasons that they began. And I think a lot of times we kind of lose focus of that. And whether that's because we're in denial or it's easier to just say, they're just having fun, they're being a kid, they're going through a phase, they'll grow out of it, that becomes very different when you're kind of looking at their motivation for use changing as they're regaining youth and their lifestyle is changing, the people that they're running around with is changing, and they're pulling away from those activities that they use as positive influence and support in their life. So where does this begin? It becomes in one of three substances that have really been perceived as safe or not as bad. And that's with marijuana, alcohol, because a lot of people even don't even recognize alcohol as a drug. The number one drug that destroys most families in this nation, adolescents don't recognize that as a drug because most aren't doing it every day, it's only on the weekends, and the other is prescription medications. And even though we see the great evils that this creates and just the withdrawals that people become dependent on these substances, they're perceived as safe because doctors are prescribing them. And that's the thing that kind of misleads adolescents. And I think that's going to be the big thing I really kind of want to focus tonight is we're losing track on what is the message we are communicating to the youth today about substances and about what this actually creates. But what we also tend to see now is like when people are turning to substances at an early age, they're not learning how to really tolerate stress, manage their emotion, or just cope in general with life on life's terms. So what they turn to is some other unhealthy behaviors. And I tend to see kids flipping from substance use to now, that's being taken away from me for one reason or another, so now I begin to self-injure. Or now I begin to restrict my eating. Because I'm turning to something to try and alleviate this distress that I'm experiencing, and I don't know how to handle it on my own in a healthy, productive way. So what are some of those risk factors of substance? What makes somebody more of a risk than others? Unfortunately, the number one thing is being a guy. Everything you see, being a male is a huge risk factor. Just simply, guys mature slower than females. Guys are more, I don't know, impulsive, you could say. I was going to say dumb, but that just sounded wrong. But maturity standpoint, you look at guys and how they mature much slower than females. Correct? We all know this, that's why I'll just stop there. But I'm going to dig my own grave here. But you kind of look at that, and that's a huge risk factor as well as the family history. What is that family history of addiction? If you're a male and you have one parent who struggles with addiction, you have a 50% chance of developing an addiction yourself. And if you have two parents, and it's on both sides, and it's kind of both swords working against you, there's a 90% chance that you yourself are going to develop an addiction or an unhealthy behavior pattern. And the only way to prevent that from happening or that becoming reality is to not use, is to not pick that up the first time. Also, a big point that kind of we miss out on is what is the message as parents that we're sending our kids about substances? What's the behavior that I'm modeling? Is it that when I get stressed out or I'm overwhelmed, the first thing Dad does when he gets home at 5 is he just goes and cracks open a beer. And it seems like Dad really loves Bud Light. That's really his family. But that's kind of like, that gets missed. A lot of times, parents don't take a step back and say, what am I showing the kids about substance use? Am I saying this is how you solve your problems? Am I saying this is how you celebrate? Or am I just saying this is what you do every day? It's not a big deal, so don't view it that way. That's the part that kind of gets missed. And we need to kind of be mindful and be aware of what is the messages that we're communicating. Also, a big part in terms of what I see in the program is a lot of these kids come from divorced families that struggle with substances. And that plays a huge role in these split households because you're asking kids to kind of gravitate between two households that operate very differently. And let's be honest, divorce brings out the ugliest in people. It brings out behaviors and things get said to kids that they should never hear or never witness. And that is traumatic. And I think that tends to get missed. Also, you kind of look at trauma. Somebody who experiences trauma is at much greater risk of using something to try and regulate their emotions and tolerate it. That's the thing I hear a lot from people who have been sexually assaulted or physically abused or even bullied significantly is when I use, that helps me just turn my mind off and I don't have to think. And that is really a pretty scary thing that they never really were able to work through it. And I think that's a big point to just kind of keep in your mind is these traumas and these events that happen that are life-changing and really affect somebody at their core. They never learn to deal with them as long as they are using. That's why you see people who are grieving the loss of somebody who was really close to them, and they've been doing that by, hitting the bottle every night. They've never really been sober after they lost their mother or their father or their brother. that loss feels fresh and it feels real, like it just happened that other day. Because they haven't felt like they could go through the motions. They couldn't go through that process of grieving. And really, the last thing I really want to hit on here is like the lack of positive connection. The people that you surround yourself with really either set you up for success or they set you up to kind of fall into these behaviors that are unhealthy and unproductive. And what we tend to see is like when people kind of get further and further into their use, they tend to pull away more from those positive people. And sometimes they're pulling away from those positive people because they feel like they don't deserve that they're boring, lame, or sometimes those people themselves kind of pulled away and said, I don't even recognize who you are anymore. I had a kid whose family just looked at him in a family session and literally said, like, I don't know who you are. I think we had like aliens hijack you or something because you look the same, but you sure as heck don't talk the same and you don't act the same. So I have no idea who you are in this home. And that just speaks like the disconnect that substance use plays in these family relationships. And that's a huge loss. Oh my God. There we go. So why is this happening? And I just love that photo. Sorry, I'm passing. That's a wrap. This is kind of like the message that gets communicated to adolescents. Where do they see this? What's the media telling them? Marijuana was this great evil with reefer madness. Like everybody, it's just like this cult classic film. If you haven't seen it, it's probably check it out. It's really fun. But that was kind of the message that was being communicated back then to now. It goes from reefer madness to it's the greatest medicine this world has ever seen. It cures everything. It fixes everything. There's actually like a diagram that one of the websites that is actually like pro-marijuana has put out there. It has like this big circle and it has all these different diagnoses. And it says, fixes this, fixes that, fixes this, fixes that. And one of them that kind of like jumped out at me was traumatic brain injury. Because I had a traumatic brain injury. And let alone it was hard enough to really kind of like stay focused and stay present and not get stuck in my own head. So let alone you're going to smoke something that's been shown to destroy neural connections and your brain's going to recover from that? That just doesn't make sense to me. So, but also look at like what these songs, that's besides the point, sorry. So, well, you kind of look at what are these music artists putting out there. What are they promoting? You have Lil Xan, who has a Xanax bar dripping down his face. You have Lil Pump, Lil Peep, Lil Perp, and some of their lyrics are just all about glamorizing and glorifying drug use. That's what it's all about. I mean, Future has a song where he's just literally saying Molly Percocet, Molly, Molly Percocet. And it's like one of the hit songs, and it's just naming this drug over and over again. And that's what's drawing this attention. Let alone, I don't know if anybody saw CNN on New Year's Eve, but that reporter was blazed out of her mind. Or, I'm sorry, she was really intoxicated by marijuana. She literally looked around the room and was just like, where am I right now? Like, what is happening? And that's kind of the message we're saying, and I think that's what gets missed. This public message is, weed's funny, it's cute, it's good, it's all right. And kids see that and think it's hilarious. They get the message that this is acceptable, this is okay. And that's just kind of like this giant marketing scheme, just like, you know, big tobacco, right? Like putting it out there that, no, cigarettes are fine, they don't cause cancer. You smoke them on the airplane, it's great. But people don't remember that. Like, you bring it up to kids nowadays, they have no recollection of that thing in this tube, the cylinder in the sky, just filled with smoke. And that was not a big deal. But also, like, the other big thing is kind of feeding this boom is this increase in access. You kind of look at where is marijuana getting spread out from? It's from all the states that are legalizing it. There's this great map, and of course I didn't include it, that shows all, Todd got it, awesome. But it shows how that's being distributed all throughout the country. And you got the declining perceived risk. So the perceived risk if something goes down, use in that is going up. The other big move is social media. Look at who your kids are following. Look at what they are looking at. Because the top in social media who are getting followers all have handles that are all promoting drug use. And I think number one now has got to be the marijuana guy. I forget his name, but a couple of years ago he was number 3. And I imagine with the way things are going right now, he's got to be number 1. But what is it that they are putting out there? They are highlighting, glamorizing, and glorifying substance use, and they're not talking about any of the negatives associated with it, of course. So, this has to be a big part of what keeps this going. So, like, once somebody uses, and they get that experience, and they get that euphoria, it kind of puts them in this place where now everybody just wants to be happy. You know, God forbid you feel anything negative. And we were talking about using, it just lights up their brain. It's like, there's that euphoria. I busted through that wall, and now I can actually experience joy. This is great. But when you come back down, what that tends to do over time, and sometimes for people, it's the first time that they use. It also opens up that back door. And what that back door has waiting for it is increase in anxiety, increase in depression, and it kind of puts them now on this circular wheel now. Kind of put on the hamster wheel. It's like I'm always just trying to chase that, catch it. And unfortunately what that does is it reminds the person at that time that right now where I'm at, I'm not happy and I'm not good. So I know how to get that. And those thoughts and those cravings and those urges to go get away from what they're experiencing get stronger until it pushes them to continue to use. And that's how people get stuck in this cycle. Even if we're just talking about, no, it's just weed, it's just weed. But you're sitting alone in your room just trying to smoke it away instead of learning how you're going to manage it and figure out how can I move forward and be content in my own life. I just like that picture. I think it's cute. So, all right, so what are some things that kind of might indicate that something's off, something isn't going right? There might be some behavior that's kind of alarming to me when we talk about drug use, right? Lying. It's a game of shadows. Like, oh, I'm over in so-and-so's house, but you don't know who my friends are. You haven't met my friends because when I tell you I'm going to my friend's house, I walk out the door, walk down the street, they're waiting for me at the corner, and I get in that car, and you've never seen what they drive, nor what they look like. I turn my tracking device off. That's a big one that we tend to hear. And that becomes a giant battle. The excuse normally is what? Oh, it drains my battery. I gotta save my battery. But it's all because they are going somewhere up to something that they just don't want you to know about. Also, random money appears. All of a sudden, they got a lot of cash in their pocket, or money's missing from your wallet. You might see like these Gucci belts start appearing. That tends to be a new big thing that the kids are pushing nowadays. Or these Louis Vuitton belts, where now they start selling belts. Or now they tell you that they're really into science and they have scales appearing in their house. I mean, that's a new one, right? Or that the bong is a beaker. I mean, I don't know. But also, like a big thing that kind of happens is when they come home from being out. How do they respond when they're coming home? Do they not sugar their eyes, keep their head down, just go straight to their room? Do they go right to the fridge and just raid that? Or do they have a hard time even getting in the door? And you got to open the door because you hear them fumbling with it. You know, those are all kind of big things that are letting you know something might be up. So where are these hiding places? Where could they possibly be putting this stuff? You turn the room upside down, can't find anything. Well, you check the ceiling tiles in the basement. I mean, one of my favorite stories, we had a kid in the program who did this, hid it in the ceiling tiles in his basement. Of course, like his parents never cleaned it, so it was really easy for them to find the stash that he had hidden up there because it was just a giant pile of dust on their pool table. So that's kind of a big thing, as well as these fake bottles. Like these bottles that have fake bottoms in it. This is a very common thing that you can buy at expensive gifts, and they just hide this. It looks like a regular bottle. By all sense, you look at it like, that's just Pepsi. No, it's a great way to hide drugs, as well as old medicine bottles. So if you had like an amoxicillin prescription and you just got the bottle laying around, filling that up. You know, outside, like a lot of kids hide their drugs outside too. So whether it's in a pot outside, underneath, like where sometimes people keep their spare keys, that kind of gets hidden. But these are just some of the most common hiding places. You know, they sometimes don't get too creative, and then at some point they tend to get really lazy about hiding because they just don't care at some point, right? And that's when we talk about like hitting such an extreme that they're not even trying to cover it up anymore, and they just leave stuff laying around. So, this is the big thing where it's like talking about substances. For people that don't really know how to have these conversations, it might not be the most comfortable thing to do. There's a great resource online. It's the Parent Talk Kit online. Literally, you search that, you find that, it gives you all these great resources, and it kind of walks you through different scenarios and situations on how to approach your kid and talk about substance use. But the other big thing is talk about the elephant in the room. This is the big thing that a lot of people don't like to talk. I mean, it's kind of like, I'll deal with it when it comes up. I'll deal with it when it comes up. When this happens, then we'll handle it. We got to be proactive. We got to have these conversations because, like, the way media is today, everything is out there. Other kids are talking about it, and sometimes in people's households, they get exposed to this at a very young age. So kids that kind of grow up in a home, they got an addiction going on, they see this stuff. They know it already. So they can come from school, talk about this, and talking to your kids, and just having that conversation and saying, like, hey, look at the news. You're hearing all about this opiate epidemic. Or you're in high school. Have you guys lost anybody? Like, has anybody in your school overdosed from heroin or from fentanyl? Like, these are real things that happen that, I mean, I get it, it's uncomfortable to talk about this, but It's better to have that conversation than playing the game of, what if we had only had that conversation? What if we had talked about it? And also the big thing is, if you have a son or daughter who's in recovery, and you're like, you know what, I expect you to be sober, you need to be sober, but they come up and they talk about, well, I just really want to use today. That's, in my mind, like, that's awesome. Like, the fact that people in recovery are talking, because that's what people in recovery do. They talk, they communicate, they go to meetings, they get it out, and they get that support and saying, hey, what is it that you need from me? But the big thing is really just being involved, right? Being a parent, being involved, being active in their lives. So you can tell when your gut tells you something's off, something just doesn't seem right. They just look a little odd, their speech is delayed, I don't know what's going on. All of a sudden now their clothing's changing. I don't know what's going on, what they're doing. Sometimes it means just getting out of that house to have this conversation, because sometimes the home kind of takes on that feel, and it just is kind of like a battleground, just waiting for the next shoe to drop here. So sometimes I say, hey, go grab a shake of like Overweiss. But the family relationship is the biggest thing. When we talk about people who are struggling with addiction, we talk about something, this is what is either going to set them up for success or set them up for failure. Because a lot of times people like to point the finger and say, you're the issue, you're the problem, you need to change, fix you. When in reality, it's the whole dynamic. It's the system that is totally and completely out of whack that needs to be adjusted, and everybody plays a role in that recovery. So this is the thing, where the family relationship is improving. This is what I see be the biggest outcome of success, is when those parents are willing to actually hear and listen to what their child is saying, instead of waiting to hear what they're saying and then telling them how they're wrong and why they're being an idiot about it. So that's the big thing, is being flexible, because obviously getting to this point, whatever was going on didn't work. So we got to figure out a different approach moving forward that is going to be successful for everybody involved here. So what are we seeing? So this is part where I can talk about drugs with you guys. So these are the things that we are seeing in program. Alcohol, benzos, fake Xanax, the opiates. I mean, we're seeing a lot of that coming through. And kids actually searching that out. Marijuana. I mean, 25I, we'll touch on that too, which is a fake hallucinogen. That's really kind of starting to go on. Well, let's talk about vaping, because this is the big thing, right? So for everybody who knows, vape are are electronic cigarettes that heat a vapor, and people inhale it and they exhale it. And the problem is with this, vapes are a great way of covering up what is actually in it. Like, you never really know what they're inhaling, what they're smoking, and a lot of these vapes actually cover up the smell. So when they exhale it, so let's say a THC oil, smells the exact same. It has no scent to it. It doesn't have that skunky smell that you expect to see. So people are sneaking these into their house. They're not in their house, but sneaking them into school. They're on the bus. They're using them in class. They're using them in the bathroom. They're coming everywhere. And the perception with these is that they are totally 100% completely harmless. That they're as safe can be, and there are no problems. And that is the furthest thing from the truth. I mean, I put a quote up there for one of the kids where it's just like, well, it won't give you as much cancer. I mean, that's right there, like one of my favorites, one of my kids who's just like, I'm just a little bit of a drug dealer. Okay. So, it's like you're either all in or you're all out, right? But the thing is, like, people were like, oh, it's just, I just need it. Well, they need it because it gives them a buzz. Same thing with cigarettes, right? Like, people smoke cigarettes, it gives you that buzz. And people forget, they don't really notice that one of those little pods that kids are tending to go through, like in a day, and sometimes they go through multiples a day, is the equivalent of one pack of cigarettes. So that's kind of like saying, like, hey, you know what, honey, it's all right, I'll go pick you up a carton this week. Like, nobody in their right mind is buying their child, like, menthol cigarettes and saying, here's your carton, you're welcome, enjoy yourself, at 15 years old, right? But that's ultimately, in a sense, like what we're doing by saying, I'll get you pods for your 16th birthday. You'll be so happy. They're mango flavored too. Like, this is ridiculous. Sorry, on some things I just have a little bit of a slam. But vaping is cool. And the other big thing with vaping is that upperclassmen know this is a big market. So like your juniors, seniors, this is big money. They are buying these vapes, and then they are upselling them to freshmen for like $50, $100, and they're just making a killing on this stuff. The other big thing is, they're doing this in the bathroom, they're doing this in classrooms. And what they can actually do is when they're actually like hitting their vape and you hear that crackling noise, they can literally, with Juuls, they can literally just hold in the vapor and it disappears. They call that ghosting it. It's got a cool term. So, but the funny thing is, there's actually carcinogens present in vape. So, a lot of those carcinogens like nitrosamines and diethylglycol, So the first one is carcinogen. The other's been present in mass poisonings dating back to 1937. So feel free to go back and check that out. I mean, it's the same thing like with cigarettes, right? There's like rat poison and all these awful, horrible things. Well, these have the exact same stuff. Maybe the levels aren't as high as cigarettes, but it's not all good for you. And the funny thing is, like online, again, just like marijuana, like the regulation of this is scattered. So online, they're able to sell such high marketed, really concentration that's not being regulated, and they can say it's lower, and that's what they're actually doing, and then they get it tested, it is significantly higher than what they're promising. I actually saw one that was being sold for $100 and something, but it was like the equivalent of like 10,000 cigarettes in one of these little things. So it's pretty wild what they're trying to do and what they're trying to push out there, because that just speaks to everything. When we're talking about drugs in general and substances, it's all about what's the strongest, what's going to give you the most messed up, and what's going to take the least amount to do it. Hence all the different forms of marijuana we're now seeing. But let's talk about Xanax, because this is our next big outbreak. This is something that is just flying through adolescents, and I see them using this pretty consistently across the board. And why this is being so sought off is because this literally just turns off people's frontal cortex. So the part of their brain that makes you actually worried, like, maybe that's a bad idea. Maybe I should not go run across the street right now. This isn't a good idea. Or maybe, I'm on top of the parking garage in Naperville. Like, I maybe should not be standing on one foot on top of this. Like, that fear is gone. And you kind of look at the stats, and I got an example of a chart that shows just like the number of overdose deaths. It's quadrupled since '96. And the problem with this, especially when I talk about adolescents with this, they black out, they pass out, and traumatic things can happen when they're unconscious and under the influence of Xanax. Also, people do really impulsive and reckless things when they're under the influence of this drug because there's no fear. They feel invincible. Nothing bad is going to happen. And I can tell you, I've had 3 kids in program whose stories kind of jump out at me because they're all 3 involved in car accidents. One was on the highway. She actually passed out from being under the influence of Xanax. Her car swerved into the median in the middle of the highway going some ridiculous speed, I'm sure. And luckily, she didn't have traumatic brain injury. They took her to the nearest hospital and she was okay. I mean, another kid passed out while driving down his street going home and crashed into a parked car, and another kid did the exact same thing. So, I mean, kids are getting under the influence and driving, and it's really reckless behaviors. So how's this being used? Because they're not just taking the pills and taking them like a medication. The new big thing is they're putting it in a soda bottle, shaking it up, letting it dissolve, and then just chugging it. So some kids will stack them with 2 or 4, and then just let it dissolve in there, shake it up, and then just go. We had one kid do that, literally just fell asleep and had to be taken to the ER from the school library. The other thing is Xanax candy. Like, you look at those gummy bears, it's the same thing with marijuana edibles. You can't tell the difference between regular gummy bears and those gummy bears. I know the picture's really not the best, but you can see it in color. Really good point. But chewing, dissolving. Not too many people are snorting or smoking, but I mean, you can do that with it, but that's not the most common method of taking this drug at this point. So a lot of the big things are gummy Xanax and just chugging it. I mean, you kind of think about like why they used it. And I had a kid in the program who was using this because he liked to fight. He liked to be impulsive. He liked to not have to feel and remember the fact that he had been sexually assaulted at age 2 by his grandfather. And he named that. He said, I don't like to remember that. When I'm sober, I have to think about these horrific memories I have. And each time like that would come up, he would go and take Xanax. And then he would go fight. And he liked it because it made him feel like he was in control and he didn't have to deal with that trauma. But that whole time that trauma was driving him. And that's the big part where it's like nothing can change until you get sober and actually deal with the demons that are driving this. And this is kind of what I was talking about earlier. You kind of look, the number is just continually going up. And we kind of look at like benzodiazepines and opiates. Benzos tend to be present in about 80% of opioid deaths as well. So alcohol, I feel like, is the drug that kind of gets missed. We kind of keep forgetting that alcohol is a drug. And that this is involved in 90% of teenage accidents. And really horrible things happen when people are drinking alcohol in excess. Because we're talking about adolescents, we're talking about young adults, college age, even like fresh out of college. People aren't drinking because they're like, oh, no, this is good, I'm savoring this. No, they're chugging, they're shotgunning, and they're ripping beer bongs because they're just trying to get drunk and intoxicated as quickly as they can. That's the whole intention behind this. And the other challenge is now if you have somebody who's struggling with mental health issues like anxiety or depression, primarily depression, and they have these suicidal ideations, these thoughts coming through their mind, they're much more likely to act on those thoughts or those impulses at that time. Sometimes individuals, I just get these like flashes, like people I work with, who come into the program and their arm is, they've done a number on their arm. And it's just like, what happened? I was really intoxicated, I thought about killing myself, and I actually just really cut really deeply and needed to get my arm stapled because that cut was so deep. So that's the part we kind of, again, bring alcohol on this. It takes that depression to another level, and that impulsivity and that buffer to kind of like stop is gone. Again, kids don't view this as a drug because not everybody's doing it every day. And that's kind of the idea of addiction is you got to be doing this consistently all day, every day. You got to be, really wreaking havoc in your life on a consistent basis. A lot of kids don't drink like that. They drink on weekends. So that's viewed as a social activity. So I'm just a social drinker. It's not a problem. However, when you look at like the stats, it's like 1 out of every 5 high school students has experienced a blackout. That's a pretty scary number. So think about if you're sitting in a room with 20 kids, 4 of them have experienced a blackout, and they're freshmen, sophomore, juniors, like that's wild. And that's the part where it's just like, this is a big deal. You're kind of seeing drinking coming back, and the opportunity to kind of like use other substances when they're under the influence. Like that's when people start experimenting with other drugs, right? You're drunk, you're intoxicated, now that buffer, that little voice in your head that tells you this is a bad idea, you shouldn't do that. No, I'm going to do it. So people make a lot of mistakes that they then have to deal with once they get sober. And you talk about sexual assault, you talk about the blackout piece where it's like, oh, I did what last night? I said what to who? Then they got to repair that damage, and that's affecting them when they're no longer even under the influence. And that's a lot of damage on somebody who's already struggling with anxiety, depression, or just somebody who doesn't struggle with that at all. And then Adderall, amphetamine, the study drugs, the drugs that are viewed as not bad, right? Like these are just academic boosters, and that's the furthest thing from the truth, because if people don't have ADHD and they're searching this drug out for finals week, they're taking this drug and it is creating a euphoria. And when that euphoria is triggered and created by taking this drug, you're talking about now increasing the potential for an addiction, because the brain remembers that feeling. It remembers feeling on top and creating this just rush that I want to get that again. And I can use the excuse that I have a test next week. So that's kind of fueling the fire. And it's a great way that the mind keeps people from actually acknowledging and saying like, oh, maybe I have a problem with this. No, I just want to be a better student. And that's kind of like when you talk about the disease of addiction, it's also a mental disease because the thinking and the distortions become so strong that you believe it and you buy into it. The problem with this, again, is kind of like when, and this is a theme I noticed when I was putting this together, is that when you talk about depression, and you're coming down from Adderall, which tends to be present in a lot of Molly as well, which is ecstasy, that come down to be very, very dangerous for people who struggle with depression. And that's when you tend to see a lot of more impulsive choices because they are literally exhausted. So you can see a suicide attempt, a self-injury behavior, some very dangerous behaviors come at that time because emotionally they are drained. So let's talk about weed. All right. And I know Todd's going to cover this more in depth, so I get a lot of questions from a lot of parents and kids that I work with, like, what is weed even called nowadays? Because we're talking about a completely different drug than back in the day. Marijuana today is not marijuana of yesteryear. This is not your Cheech and Chong weed. So, I mean, you kind of look at what these things look like now, and the name of it. There's songs that are just called, like, broccoli. Broccoli. Like, one of these kids plays a song like, this is just awful, but I was even looking today, and like Lil Perp has this song, it's like the 802, I want to say it's called, because I'm so hip and I know today's rap music. But it's just like, I'm reading this, and it is like a love story romance to marijuana. And that's kind of the piece where like, this isn't just like, oh, I'm using to have fun, like I'm using because this defines me, I'm in love with this. God forbid you ask me to give up this relationship that I have. And that's what I see happen with adolescents. Is that marijuana becomes their primary relationship no matter what the relationships look like at their time. Anything that goes into supporting that relationship, they're all good with. Because a big part of that happened with this. Where now you kind of look at like early 90s, like 80% of high school seniors thought smoking every day was a problem. They said that was an issue, that's bad, you should not be doing it. Which means you guys. Nowadays, high school seniors, 38% think that. That is a huge flip. And you kind of look at the potency of marijuana too at the same time. So you got decline to perceived risk, So use is going up, as well as the potency of marijuana going up. And there are certain strains that go up to 39% smoke. Mind you, there is a lot of different forms of marijuana that are out now. Where it's shattered. I totally just turned it off. Hello? There we go. Fidgeting. So, but like all these different forms, you get the extracts of marijuana, they get up to 98% pure THC. And that's the really scary thing, is because now these drugs are getting just, the whole goal is just get it as high as it can be. And the whole thing, like I hear this a lot, is like marijuana is not a drug, it's not addictive, it's mentally addictive. Let's be honest with you, like every addiction is mental addiction, right? Like, your brain is your biggest organ in the body. So it is going to, not brain, it's an organ, most powerful, most direct. And when your mind is giving you thoughts, images, flashbacks, creating euphoric recall, and we're just talking about weed, I'm not talking about heroin, I'm not talking about opiates, I'm talking about euphoric recall where they feel like they're high. And all of a sudden the kid in the room is just like, I smell weed. Yeah, that is your brain trying to get you to go get high. And that just talks to the power that marijuana has on controlling and rewiring the brain. And you tend to see like the neurotoxicity that it has on the brain, because when people are smoking pretty often, pretty regularly, you tend to see the reaction times a little bit delayed. And it's kind of like, I know, you ask them a question, you kind of see them thinking, and it's just like, all right, here they go, here they go, here they go, they're going to answer, and then it comes out like 20 seconds later. It's still late because the brain is figuring out, how am I retrieving this information and getting it out now that marijuana has really created these deficits that I'm learning to have to recover from. And the big thing is, like, I hear this all the time, and this is pretty scary. Like, when you think about adolescents who maybe have only been smoking for a year or two, and they're like, I'm smoking now to feel normal. This is my new normal. I don't know how to manage my life high. I don't like myself high. That's scary. I don't even know what I'm interested in. I had a kid break down in program. He was 15 years old, started selling and using at 12, and he just broke down in group one day. He's just like, I'm just scared because I have no idea who I even am anymore. My interest when I was 12 years old, those can't be the same interests I have at 15. That's completely, I was a kid then. So people get so disconnected from themselves that they lose track of really what it is that's important, where they're going. And also kind of look at like people's choices, right? When you talk about addiction, people gravitate towards the whole thing, right? Birds of a feather flock together. You gravitate towards people who like to smoke or like to use. And that tends to be the whole peer group. You might have two different groups of friends, and they're like, oh, not all my friends use, but your school friends don't, but the ones that you're hanging out with outside do. And then you look at the physiological piece. Like, people don't notice that marijuana also has a physiological piece when kids are detoxing from this. And I see this happen in programs. Their anxiety gets higher, their depression gets more intense. They have no appetite, so they go some days just eating like scraps, like barely nothing. Their sleep cycle gets disrupted 100%. They have a hard time staying asleep or falling asleep at night. And they're getting insomnia. When they have insomnia, where's their mind going? Weed would solve this. Just getting high would take care of that. And they know they're getting drug tested, and they don't care about consequences because weed trumps everything. And you're going to tell me that they're not marketing adolescents, right? Like, that's the whole thing. Like, we're going to legalize it. It's for medicinal purposes. It's going to be only for adults. You're going to tell me this scantily clad little lady over here is not targeting adolescent males. It's enjoy back to school specials. Not 21? That's fine. We'll help you get your card. Could you guys imagine if Benny's put an ad out like this? Oh, it's your senior prom. You're 18. We'll hook it up. Don't worry. We got the cops. Like, that's crazy. And then drug driving. So, like, drinking and driving actually is not number one anymore. Drugs have preceded drinking and driving as the number one. And 33% of those people are under the influence of marijuana. The very scary thing is that people who smoke tell me this all the time. Makes me a better driver. Makes me a better driver. Please. And I unfortunately have like a harrowing story to like share about this because we had a kid in the program who was the designated driver for his friend. He went to a party, he thought he was doing the right thing. And his friend was hammered, or just under the influence. I forget, this was many years ago. And he had just smoked a little bit that night. He's like, I'm just going to smoke. I'm just going to smoke. It's fine. So he got high, drove his friend home, and he thought he had done this hundreds of times before. Didn't think it was a big deal. So that night it was actually a little bit cloudy, or foggy. That's where it is, nighttime. And what ended up happening is when they're driving home on this darkly lit road, the road curved, but he didn't see that. And he wasn't able to react in time because marijuana slows reaction time.
He ended up driving straight through a person's living room into their house. His best friend, who this kid grew up with, went on childhood vacations with, was treated like a son by this kid's family. Killed his best friend. He got projected. He saw his best friend die. That kid had to go to court and testify. He's being prosecuted by his best friend's family. He had to hear some very horrible things. And it's heartbreaking. Because nobody at that point thought something like that would happen until it did. And that's what we talk about. When we talk about adolescence and that brain and that foreshadowing, nothing bad is going to happen until it actually does. And then we're talking about horrific tragedies. And then you kind of look at the bottom. Traffic deaths increased in Colorado by 48% with legalization. And I got a nice little statistic here to kind of show that graph for you. So you kind of look at 2006, 37 deaths affiliated with marijuana. To 2015, we have 115. And I think the graph just kind of speaks for itself when we're talking about just marijuana's impact on driving safety. And marijuana culture, right? Lifestyle. It is a culture, it is a lifestyle that kids and adolescents are buying into. Young people, you can kind of look at it like, I know you smoke. You got the Huff socks, you got the drug rug, you got the Rasta colors. Like, you're making it pretty clear, I know what you like to do with your free time. Maybe even right now. But it's just the attitude and the belief that this is the way to go about it. And you kind of talk about just how this is encompassing and stunts people's growth and development. And I know I already talked a little bit about this, but, trashing with marijuana. They did a study in New Zealand and found that people were at 7 times greater risk of attempting suicide than those who didn't smoke, who struggle with depression. And it makes sense when you kind of look at it. It's a very isolating behavior. Smoking by yourself, pulling away from friends, activities that you once enjoyed, not having that motivation, the motivations to use, and kind of being disconnected from really what is important. What is it that really matters in life? And that is a horrible thing. That's kind of the piece where, at Linden, obviously, I feel like that's the biggest thing for us, I feel like, with the kids who do strokes. 99% of the kids I see are dually diagnosed, and very rarely do you see anybody who is just straight chemically dependent. You see them dually diagnosed in the same spot, hopeless, figuring out that this life isn't worth living if I can't engage in this. This is making it easier for me to cope. We get kids who are able to relate and connect on something that's real and authentic and kind of talk about what is actually going on. And I feel like that's so powerful. But the whole idea of just smoking to feel normal. Imagine how hard that's got to be for somebody every day to feel like they just can't take a step out and just be okay in their own skin without being high. You look at people with anxiety. Again, 7 times greater risk than the general population become dependent on marijuana. Whether it's slowing down those racing thoughts. The challenge is now once somebody stops using marijuana, that depression, that anxiety gets more intense. And what they've done in the process is they've lowered their ability to tolerate those emotions, to tolerate those feelings. Now any sign, the perception that anxiety or depression is going to come up, I'm going to get high because I need to be prepared to deal with this situation. So now, transition to hallucinogens. So acid is actually making a comeback. Acid tends to be a drug that we're seeing a little bit more frequently now. And I've tended to notice throughout the years, it seems like that drug is steadily making its way back. And it's gaining a different reputation. It's being perceived as being pure. It's perceived as being not bad. It's harmless. It actually opens your mind. And the whole belief that you got to be in the right frame of mind, you got to be in a good mindset to actually have a good experience with this. However, you can't control how your trip goes. As much as people like to experience and believe that they can, you talk about things that become unpredictable, uncontrollable. We've had 3 kids? 2 kids come to the program wearing casts on both their legs, and it's like, what happened? I had a bad trip, thought I was being chased, I jumped off the parking garage in Naperville. You're lucky to be alive. But that's what happens, is that it leads to these very impulsive behaviors that people are at greater risk of hurting themselves than hurting anything else. They're going to do something to themselves because of what their perception is. And now you have this new drug, 25-eyes. Well, with acid, the other thing I'd say is that they're stacking acid. So instead of it being like 1 drop on paper, they're finding it stacked. They're getting 2, 3. And sometimes people don't know what they're getting. Or they do know, and then they're just taking it thinking it's going to be okay. The other drug that's coming out here is 25-I. So 25-I is your synthetic hallucinogen. Well, And it is more intense, more powerful than acid, and it's being sold as acid. But people have no idea what they're getting until what I hear from kids is, it burns your tongue. That's the only thing I'm hearing. Well, what you're getting is that when people are no longer under the influence of either one of these drugs, you're seeing drug-induced psychosis come up. And you're seeing now they have to deal with things that they're hearing, seeing, their perceptions are altered, and they're dealing with this when they're no longer under the influence, and they're learning now how to deal with this anxiety and these issues that have been created just by using this one time. That's all it takes is just one time to trigger this. And you have no idea if your family has like a predisposition or if your brain is predisposed to having schizophrenia or having psychosis. This one time could activate that gene and turn this on for a life-changing course. The same thing happens with marijuana, unfortunately, I would say as well. I remember one young man that we had that was 14 years old, and he had been smoking marijuana pretty heavily, and it was about 6 months, and all of a sudden, his mind got flipped. He was delusional, he was psychotic, which meant he felt and saw things that were not there. And you just see this kid was really, really hurting. It was heartbreaking, because it's like 14, your lifestyle has been changed. Your course, it's like, you're going to have to go into like permanent care, because how are people going to take care of you when you're having a hard time managing for yourself? So that's the part where I'm just like, this stuff is serious and it's real, and this changes people's courses of their life, and it's where they're going and their goals. But, alright, so opioids. So what we tend to see, I will say with heroin, we're still seeing that around. We are not seeing that often in outpatients. What we tend to see now is a lot more lean, and we're seeing fake Xanax, so fentanyl is coming back. And I think the next slide I have kind of speaks to just fentanyl's growing presence in the community. And that's the challenge is now. In DuPage County, we kind of look at the staggering difference in the staff between 2015 and 2016. So in 2015, we had 51 deaths. 36 from heroin, 7 from heroin and fentanyl combined. Because that's the challenge, like people don't know what they're getting. People think they're getting the same stuff every time they go to the same dealer, but their dealer can be cutting in fentanyl, and they don't know that until they get it, and sometimes that's too late. And 8 were from fentanyl alone. Now, fast forward into 2016, heroin didn't change, but fentanyl sure as hell made its presence known. And that's a very scary thing, because you look at 26 from heroin and fentanyl alone, 16 from fentanyl. You factor fentanyl in there, there's more deaths from fentanyl now than heroin. But heroin kind of starts out because people go to heroin because prescription pills, they get hooked on that, and 50% of them make that transition to heroin because heroin is cheaper, it's more readily accessible, and it's lost that image. Somewhere along the line here, it lost that image of being a dirty drug. And I've actually heard kids talk about heroin as a party drug. And you kind of look at the effects of heroin, it's like, it doesn't look like much of a party. But that's kind of the image of the way it's being personified, and that's kind of allowing this to grow. So there's a lot of misinformation that's getting put out there by young adolescents. And you never really know what you're getting with this stuff. The supply dealer might think that they know what they're doing, but they're cutting it themselves because they want to turn more of a profit. They know fentanyl is a little bit cheaper to work with than heroin, so they cut it with fentanyl, but they're not going to tell who they're working with that they're doing that. And you look at, I had one young man that I worked with, he's like, this was the best painkiller I ever had. And it wasn't physical pain he was talking about, he was talking about emotional pain. He's like, I could just turn it off. I didn't have to feel that abuse that I went through. I didn't have to think about how worthless I felt. I didn't have to feel any of that. I just got away from it. And you kind of look at, this is a drug that's tolerance builds incredibly quick. So a lot of people get up to, upwards of, man, on average I was here for like 10 to 12 bags, but I know a lot of people get up to 20, 30 bags of heroin a day. You're talking about a $200 to $300 habit. You got to figure out how you're supporting that habit, what you're doing to kind of get that money. You're talking about some really grimy things and people that you're hurting. And that's where you're talking about the total breakdown in trust with family, pawning stuff, taking mom's wedding rings to the pawn shop, and mom having to go back and forth multiple times to re-pawn that out. So this is something that can just destroy families. And now you're back to the fentanyl. And that's the big thing where it's getting sold as fake Xanax. It's getting pressed into bars. And if the only thing you can look at the difference between the fake and the real is that the fake one looks a little bit more chalky. It's not as fine. But if you're looking at somebody who's just trying to buy Xanax and they're trying to make a quick deal, they're not going to notice that. They're not going to pick that up. And it's 50 times more potent than heroin. And that's the risk factor with this, is that a lot of times people don't know that this is mixed in. No one's making that announcement. Hey, here it is. But sometimes word of mouth on the street travels that if you're looking for this, go see so-and-so. And unfortunately, when people hear about like overdose deaths from heroin, people's minds don't go like, oh my God, I really should reconsider what I'm doing. It goes, there must be some good stuff. I need to go hit that up. I'll be smart about it. I can control it. They're just being idiots. And that's the insanity of this, right? That is the insanity. It's like, you know what? We talk about like Narcan parties that people have, where it's like, I'm just going to get stocked up on Narcan, and we're going to sit here, we're going to do this together. So if you go down, I'll get you. If I go down, you get me. And now you're talking about another drug that's getting mixed in with heroin, carfentanil. And that is an elephant tranquilizer. That, I don't know, I saw a video where a police officer actually overdosed just on the powder in the air, just breathed the air, and carfentanil got in the system, and they had to get Narcan, because this drug is so powerful that just like the smallest part of it can just lead to an overdose. And the crazy thing is now, when you're talking about this drug, Narcan doesn't bring people back, and they're using multiple shots of Narcan, which is an opioid antagonist, which is pushing that out of the system, which can be a lifesaver. Gives people a second chance to kind of move forward and do something different. Because a lot of the heroin deaths and overdoses that happen are relapses. Because tolerance from heroin and from opioids goes away incredibly quickly. And it builds incredibly quickly. So a lot of times these overdose deaths aren't people trying to kill themselves, they're just trying to get high. But now they went back to that dose that they thought they could handle because that's what they're using last time. And now that dose is fatal. And this is always the thing that, chasing the dragon, this is the term. Chasing the dragon, just trying to get high. Just trying to get that first high, that knot. And that first high is vivid, it's real. That's kind of the idea that people have where they get that euphoric rush. Their body gets all warm, tingly thinking about it. That just drives them wanting to go back and get that. And unfortunately, again with that tolerance, it's always that idea, just one more will get me there. Just one more line, one more shot. That'll help me get to where I want to be. But they can never really catch it. So that's kind of what's feeding the addiction of these really impulsive and somewhat, negative behaviors. And you kind of, you look at this vivid memory, it's kind of like, everybody I've talked with who struggled with heroin, like they could recall that as if it was happening yesterday. They can tell that story. And it's a really dangerous place to go because it just kind of creates that same feeling, that idea that reminds them about why they're doing what they're doing. The Good Samaritan law is a huge thing that a lot of people don't know about, but I think it's getting a lot more publication now. So what they found is, obviously, overdose deaths are the leading cause of accidental deaths in the United States at this point. So what this does is it prevents the person who is overdosed, and it protects the caller from prosecution for substance use. So, because they're like, hey, we need to save lives. We're not about catching somebody for a possession charge at this point. We need to save lives because people's lives matter, and that's the important thing. Is figuring out how we can keep people alive so they can make different choices moving forward and live a life that's worth living for themselves. So there's something going on here. And I think kind of part of this, when I was thinking about putting this together, it's kind of like figuring out when is treatment needed? When do we kind of look at, taking the next step? You guys can hear that? Okay, there we go. Because we all play a role in this. I feel like a lot of times, when I kind of look back, and I'm thinking about people that I've grown up with, friends that I've known, everybody likes to turn a blind eye, it's not that bad. Or even teachers in schools. And I'm not saying if anybody here is a teacher that you're guilty of this, but I have kids in the program who come in and tell me, they know I'm hot, they don't do anything, they don't say anything to me about it. They just let me put my head down, and they just go about their business and don't say anything to anybody. These are opportunities that we have to kind of bring awareness and say, hey, this is not all right. You might think I'm a jag, but I'm going to call you out on this because we got to figure out how we're going to get you moving forward and actually maintain and live a life sober and see all the great things that it has to offer you. Because right now you're kind of living in that box where everything just seems to fit just with your using. And there's other options. There's other treatment here. So when we're talking about treatment, you kind of look at when using starts affecting people's moods, their behavior, their choices, their relationships, schoolwork, and now their anxiety or depression are hitting unmanageable levels where they're saying, this is my only tool, this is my only skill of managing the way that I feel. That's a pretty scary place to be in the world. Because what are you going to do when you have a problem with your boss? Well, I got to go hit this real quick. I'll be right back. That doesn't work. You need life skills. You need to figure out how I can manage what I'm feeling and also manage relationships. Because when music gets factored in, relationships become unmanageable. Because you're having a hard enough time managing the one you got with you. So, you kind of look at like a clearly established pattern of use. And this is kind of where it's blown past that like social stage, right? Like the social, I'm just a social user. Well, social recreational really has been defined as like 1 to 3 times a month. So there could be periods where like maybe you're going like a month without using, once here, once there. That's when you're kind of looking at, we need to figure out some interventions to help keep you sober, help you not engage in this behavior. Let's look at who you're running around with, where you're going. Maybe we're looking at drug screens, maybe we're looking at creating a different kind of structure for you. But if you're unwilling and unable to do that, then we got to find somewhere that's going to create that structure for you and put you in a place to actually address what it is that's driving all of this. And also, if you're finding bongs, pipes, hitters, homemade bongs out of 20-liter bottles, that's usually a big sign of saying, like, this is taking that next step. Or you're seeing apples that have kind of been, like, carved out. That's another one as well. So, one of the... There we go. Anyway, I totally flew through something there. So, but we want to promote healthy decision making, right? We want to be involved in the kids' lives. We want to help them see that there are other options here. And communicating clearly, I hear this all the time, like, my parents never told me they didn't want me smoking. They never told me they didn't want me drinking. They never brought that up. And when I bring it up to the parents, they're just like, yeah, I never thought I had to. I thought that was just implied. I thought that was a no. No, you need to have that conversation and set very clear boundaries and expectations so that we kind of like know where we're at. And also staying active and involved. So if something's off, we know where it's at and we know how to respond. That's the big thing, is like the communication, the involvement. Because the last thing you want to do is take a step back and say, I wish I would have known. Wish I would have done something different here. Getting them involved in activities. I feel like that's the big thing where it's like structure. One of the people that I worked with many years ago, like his older brother said something to me that made a lot of sense. And this is a kid that was on probation, had been caught quite a few times. He's like, man, you just need to get structure in your life because all this unpredictable time, unstructured time, leads to unpredictable behavior. And we know what your unpredictable behavior leads to. And we got to figure out a way to kind of set you up to be successful here. So it also holds into accountability and building back trust as well. Because that's the big thing, is like, you're saying one thing, but your words at this point, we're talking about treatment and significant substance use, words don't really matter much because you get good at manipulating, you get good at saying the next right thing. So it's all about what are your actions telling me. So one of the things that, throughout my time working, I've felt like there's such a big need for adolescents in recovery. There's all these things that are great for like adults, but there's nothing that's really celebrating adolescents who are active in the recovery and doing things different. So what we've decided to do this year at Linden Oaks is on 4/21, we're having an Jesus. Yeah. I don't know why I said that with like a southern drawl either, it's weird. But what we decided is on 4/21, we are going to have an Adolescent Recovery Day. And we're going to bring people together who are active in the recovery. Because this is always a huge thing that people struggle with, is figuring out, who can I hang out with? Nobody else is in recovery. Recovery is going to be boring. This is a great way to bring people together who are working towards the same goals and also say, I can have a good time. I can have fun. I mean, we're going to be playing dodgeball, 3v3 soccer, flag football. We're going to have an expressive therapy station. And it's going to be 3 hours. And it's going to be a lot of fun, just kind of bringing people back, celebrating where they're at and where they're going, and focusing on moving forward. And we're also having 3 kids come back from our program who we have come back and speak to the group regularly and kind of share their story about recovery and kind of how this has really changed their lives. So, and these are just some books that I think are really good, really useful, just kind of like help speak to addiction and just recovery in a sense. So, if anybody wants the PowerPoint from me, if you don't have access to it, feel free to email me on the first slide, or talk to me afterwards. I'll be more than happy to send it to you. So I appreciate you all listening to me. So thank you for your guys' time tonight.
Sorry for the delay, everybody.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Todd Fink. It's good to be back again. Thank you for inviting me to return this year. And I'm grateful to be here with my colleague Justin, who's working really hard at Linden Oaks and beyond to help kids and to protect kids. So I appreciate everything he has to share, and I always learn from him. And tonight, my part of the presentation will be briefer, but I just want to take a little time to talk about medical marijuana and the implications. And it's definitely a politically charged topic, and I'm sensitive to that. My emphasis tonight is to just present more of the scientific perspective and facts and statistics that hopefully will leave you feeling at least more informed as you go forward and carry this conversation and this discussion forward. So, I begin with the map. I don't know if it's exactly the map Justin was talking about, but here we can see the greening of the United States of America. The darkest shade is the states that have fully legalized marijuana. The sort of neon green are states that have passed medical marijuana measures. And then the light green represents states that have also passed medical marijuana laws, but there is a limit to how it is administered. It has to be in an edible form, cannot be smoked. And that leaves only 4 states left that have not passed legalization or medical marijuana laws. That's Idaho, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Nebraska. You'll see that some states have a D on them. That represents states that have passed new laws to decriminalize the possession of marijuana, which leads us to 3 important issues that often get conflated, and I really want you to be aware of this. One is the decriminalization of possession of marijuana. I'm talking about what type of penalties versus decriminalization with the judicial system. Second is the medicinal use of compounds derived from drugs like marijuana. And third is the legalization of recreational or non-medical use. Justin really got into what marijuana is, but I'll just briefly run through this. It has 500 chemical compounds. The 2 most common ones are the ones we talk about the most are THC and CBD. THC being the psychoactive ingredient. It's the most used substance after alcohol and tobacco. There's various routes of administration, as Justin mentioned. People smoke it, people eat it now. There's wax. There's lots of different ways to get it into your system. There's high variability of concentration, and it is an addictive substance, as Justin described. Well, what is medical marijuana? Medical marijuana is using the whole unprocessed plant or its extracts to treat symptoms of different illnesses and conditions. Common conditions are cancer, HIV and AIDS, arthritis, chronic diseases with chronic pain. And till now, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, has not recognized or approved marijuana as medicine. And that's really important. We're going to come back to that. However, isolated components have shown promise to be able to treat certain diseases and conditions. And there are 3 products. One is called Marinol, one's called Epidiolex, and one's Sativex. And those actually look like medicine. And they are in the process of going through clinical trials to treat, the Epidiolex treats seizure disorder, and it's been shown to be effective in youth seizures. Marinol helps people regain their appetite, and it helps with nausea associated with chemotherapy. But this has not been proven yet by the FDA, and it is going through those kind of trials, which leads to what we know as medicine. Sativex is a spray. a spray that helps with chronic pain that contains both THC and CBD. Developing marijuana-based medications through the FDA process is more likely to ensure that seriously ill patients who are being supervised by their actual treating physicians have access to safe and reliable products. That comes from a source called Smart Approaches to Marijuana, which I would encourage you to check out online. This is what those 3 products look like. This looks a lot more like what we think of as medicine. Medical marijuana in Illinois. It was passed in 2013 on August 1st. It's officially known as the Compassionate Use of Medical Cannabis Pilot Program Act. It took a couple years to actually get off the ground to 2015 before people could get cards approved and before the dispensaries and cultivation centers were established. So it's taken longer than other states that have adopted medical marijuana laws. You have to be 18 years of age to apply for an ID card. However, along the way, on January 1st, 2 years ago, an amendment was passed to allow for minors to be able to obtain a card as well with certain criteria and with consent from parents and treating pediatrician. The Illinois Department of Public Health administers or distributes the cards, approves the registration cards, and they're good for 3 years. Which I think is interesting because even in California, you had to renew the card every year, and we knew pretty clearly that medical marijuana in California was just a step towards legalization. But even in California, where you could apply for a card with a headache, you needed to renew it within a year. And in Illinois, you have access to medical marijuana for 3 years. To apply for a card, you have to have a qualifying debilitating condition. There originally was 30 conditions, there's now 40, and I'll show some of those conditions. You have to have a signed physician certificate, you have to do a background check, and if you have a felony or a drug trafficking charge, you will be denied the card. You have to be at least 18 years of age, although there's an amendment where there can be special provisions for youth. School bus drivers and CDL workers cannot apply, and also, law enforcement officials cannot apply for a card. These are the 40 conditions. They include cancer, HIV/AIDS, lupus, glaucoma, Parkinson's disease, spinal diseases, fibromyalgia, and so on. Here are some basic statistics of how this is happening in Illinois. There are today 21,800 registrants. That is up significantly from a year ago, which was 7,707 registrants, so there's a 172% increase in 1 year. There's slightly more females who have medical marijuana cards in Illinois, and I think this next statistic is important. It's that there's 24% between the ages of 51 and 60. That's the largest group, age demographic, using medical marijuana in Illinois. That's actually encouraging because nationwide, well, before I get the nationwide statistic, I would say that you would probably believe that the demographic is a little bit older because older people are more likely to have pain. However, nationwide, the largest group of card holders in medical marijuana states is between 18 and 30. More than 50% nationwide of the card holders are young. And there are 20 licensed cultivation centers and 53 dispensaries in Illinois. And PTSD is highlighted here because it was added on after this measure was passed. It was added without the support of the Psychiatric Association, the American Psychiatric Association, the leading scientific body on mental illness that publishes the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual for Mental Illness. So they're the ones that actually define what PTSD is and how to treat and diagnose it. And they're not on the advisory board at the time to add PTSD, and they do not approve of that measure. And I think that's pretty scary. So the medical concerns are that the FDA has not approved this. It's not prescribed or dispensed like medicine. This, again, is what medicine looks like. Marinol, Sativex, Epidiolex, Maybe later this year, some of those products will have some FDA approval, and if they are even shown to be safe enough and they treat pain and treat certain conditions, that makes sense as medicine. But what's not medicine is going to a dispensary and buying however much you want and using it however you want for 3 years. That's not really how medicine works. So that's what the new products that are actually being studied scientifically look like. And these are example of products. One Justin showed. This is what is offered at the Naperville and Joliet dispensary called 3C Compassionate Center. You have BioJesus and Great God Bud. If you go to the Compassionate Care Center's website, the medicinal dispensary, the medical dispensary's website, to look at the medicine being offered for the conditions, here's an example of what you'll find. Blue cheese, alien rock candy, BioJesus, Ghost Train, Haze, Flow. Doesn't sound like medicine. And I think it probably has a lot to do with why you don't have a lot of people above the age of 60 carrying medical marijuana cards and making use of this measure in Illinois. So when it's called the Compassionate Care Act, I think that we really ought to be thinking about older citizens and creating an environment where they can actually safely and comfortably get help without having to navigate through this kind of maze to find medicine. And marijuana remains illegal under federal law. It is still a Schedule I drug as it's categorized by the federal government, which means it has no medicinal value according to that schedule. Smoked marijuana is not supported by any leading scientific organization, which is also scary. There are official statements from the American Medical Association, from the American Society of Addiction Medicine, and the American Cancer Society. And that's important because those are three of the most, some of the most common conditions that people are being treated for. The official scientific bodies or organizations that identify and diagnose and treat these conditions don't support this. They talk about the damage to the heart and to the brain, and when you smoke marijuana, you're still inhaling carbon monoxide, you're still creating a carcinogenic effect. So to prescribe that for somebody is not really how medicine works. Now, we know that we hear stories, and we know that there's plenty of anecdotes of how marijuana has helped people cope and it's reduced pain. I'm sure that's true, and that's why it's being studied in a more realistic medicinal form, like the products I showed you earlier. But to send somebody to a dispensary to get the whole plant and smoke that would be like sending somebody to an elm tree farm because aspirin comes from elm bark, and asking them to buy a bunch of elm trees and do whatever you want with it, and I'm sure that it will reduce your headache. Heroin reduces pain. We know that, but we wouldn't prescribe smoking heroin or injecting heroin. We wouldn't ask patients to smoke opium, even though we know that will reduce pain. What has happened is the chemical compounds that can be extracted from the plant have been and have become medicine. It is still highly addictive and still has its dangers, but it can be regulated by the FDA, and your treating physician can be with you every step of the way. This is the official statement from the American Psychiatric Association about using medical marijuana for PTSD. Because of the lack of any credible studies demonstrating clinical effectiveness, the APA cannot endorse the use of medical marijuana for the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. The Council on Research and Quality Care reviewed available evidence regarding the use of marijuana in the treatment of PTSD and concluded that no published evidence of sufficient quality exists in the medical literature to support this practice. So what's driving this? Obviously not science. What's driving it is money and corporate lobbyists. Also, many people view commercialization as inevitable. It's becoming part of a progressive movement, and it gets lumped in with a lot of other items on a progressive agenda. So you feel like you're on the wrong side of history if you don't support the legalization of marijuana. There are many myths, misperceptions, and inaccuracies like it's not addictive, which Justin explained to us that it is, that it's natural, it's a plant. So cocaine comes from a plant, opium comes from a plant. Most drugs, all drugs come from a plant. Once you burn a plant or smoke marijuana, you're already creating a chemical change. You're changing the molecular structure of the plant. You're changing it into smoke. So obviously it's no longer just a plant at that time. And where have we seen these messages before? In the history of smoking in America, when it was good for you. We knew that smoking caused cancer as early as the 20s, but it took until the 80s before that information, that science could be sufficiently disseminated, because the corporate powers that be were stronger, more influential than the scientists. I also say that it honors the American value of freedom. I think throughout my life I've thought more freedom is a good thing. That's what our country is all about. But there are implications to this, and there are consequences to those freedoms. What we're really talking about is a green light to big cannabis, and that's very different than having a plant in your backyard. We're talking about the corporatization and the targeting to children of marijuana. And so I mentioned it's lumped into progressive politics. You'll actually hear people talk about it in the same sentence that they would talk about gay marriage and civil rights, that it's part of making America better. And I think there's a big difference between who you might love and what people are doing on the roads. I think that's a big difference. So to lump it in there is a tactic, because when this progressive agenda is influencing voters, you feel like if you're not on board with this, that you're behind the times, or that you're not enlightened on these matters. Very powerful cannabis investors and lobbyists are driving these messages, as well as the promotion of tax revenues that could come from it. But I think that there's an interesting point to be made, and that is, when we look at the tobacco and alcohol industries and the revenues that they bring in and the tax dollars that they bring in, they don't at all compete with the cost involved with taking care of illness and disease associated with tobacco and alcohol. So the amount of money that the government spends on treating conditions related to tobacco and alcohol and creating resources for communities far outweighs what they take in. If it wasn't that bad for you, it wouldn't be legal. It's not as harmful as alcohol. Big cannabis targets kids, and I think this is really important, that 90% of all addiction begins in adolescence, which is why all drugs and alcohol target children. I've also read that 10% of all alcohol sales, or 10% of the American population accounts for 70% of all alcohol sales in America. 10% of Americans drive 70% of the business. So when you hear the message, remember to drink responsibly, it's really just a PR tactic, because if people actually drank responsibly, the industry would fail. So they have to target children, because addiction is the business. They're in the business of addiction, and it starts in adolescence because the brain is still developing. There is a much lower rate of addiction when people have not tried that substance until adulthood. So all the advertising goes after youth. And this is what marijuana looks like today in Colorado. These products are created to attract kids and also help them to be able to have it on them without getting in trouble. I won't go through all this because we're running out of time, but these are just more statistics about the dangers of marijuana, because we often hear that it's harmless, and you can't overdose on it, and so on, and that it's a plant. But there are very serious consequences and health risks involved with using marijuana. The poison control calls in Colorado after legalization have spiked dramatically. I think what's really kind of scary here is that this blue number on the bottom, this blue track, represents calls to poison control for children ages 0 to 8. Now, why would you have children ages 0 to 8? Because of that previous slide I showed you. When their brother or sister has a bag of gummy worms and a little toddler finds that, they can eat the whole bag of candy. And yes, it's very dangerous if you eat a bag of highly potent edibles. These are some hospitalization statistics in Colorado since legalization. We have a 70% increase with 11,000 hospitalizations in 2014, up from 4,000. Is it still a gateway drug? The answer is yes. That has not gone away. The columns on the left represent the usage of some of the other drugs that kids get into, like alcohol and cigarettes and opiates. And it's much lower if they do not use marijuana. It's much higher if they have used marijuana in the past month. The prevalence of heroin use among marijuana users in the United States is much higher. So I'll conclude by summarizing some of the implications. One is that the youth rate increases when there's medical and legalization measures passed in states. And I think that that's not a consequence that we recognize immediately when we talk about giving people more freedom. But Colorado is now has the highest marijuana usage rate among children. Also, I believe, has the highest rate in the whole world. The white and purple, not purple, the reddish purple colors represent states that have passed legalization of medical marijuana measures, and these are youth usage rates. Social justice is something that is not something you would immediately think about when we're talking about medical marijuana. But in Colorado, the arrests of Hispanic and blacks has increased since legalization because it's still illegal to use in public and to display marijuana in public places. But they are being targeted, as the statistics show. It is actually decreased for whites and increased for minorities. And this map shows where the businesses are, the marijuana businesses are concentrated in the city of Denver. This represents, on the left, more of the minority communities, because that's a whole other question. Where do you want these businesses to operate? Where do you want marijuana businesses or dispensaries to be? Most people don't want them in their neighborhoods, and you have to go through a lot of community organizing to prevent that from happening. So which communities are able to achieve that? Usually affluent and white neighborhoods. And it's harder for poorer and minority neighborhoods to have sufficient education, especially when English is a second language, to be able to organize themselves well enough to prevent these stores from being in their neighborhoods, giving more access to the people in their community. It's the same with drugstores or liquor stores and gun stores. Traffic safety, Justin has touched on this, but how do we know if we're too high to drive with medical marijuana or legalized marijuana? And how do the judicial systems know if you're too high to drive? There are different metabolism rates, different clearance rates than there is with alcohol, so there are concerns there. This one's interesting. The black markets continue to thrive and even grow. Oregon campaigned for legalization, promising to raise taxes for medical marijuana, or for legalized marijuana, and to be able to improve the state budget, and that money would go towards education and improving some of the public resources. But also to reduce the influence of the black market in that state. And since legalization in Oregon, the black market activity has increased. Simple reason is once you tax the marijuana, it influences people to go to the black market where it's not taxed. And because of the cultural shift, the black market can more easily advertise and reach people. So it's dangerous because the black market and trafficking is not just drug trafficking. Traffickers traffic everything. So we're talking about increasing drug trafficking, human trafficking when these markets grow. And it's scary and it's dangerous. There's a possible link to homelessness. I say possible because I think it's a very complicated issue why homelessness is increasing in Colorado. But since legalization in Colorado, they've experienced a 13% increase in homelessness while the national rate has decreased by 8%. I say it's complicated because people flock to that state and that complicates job situation, complicates living situations. Veterans are going there to try to get help for PTSD and pain. And when we're talking about compassion, I think we have to be thinking about the veterans. But that's why I think it's really important to advance the scientific progress on approving these drugs like Marinol, Epidiolex, and Sativex. Crime rates have increased in Colorado and legalized states. This graph here represents the number of public arrests for public displays and consumption of marijuana. Before legalization in Colorado, it was 8 in 2012. 8 arrests for public displays in Denver. In 2015, it's 752. So that is a major culture shift. So just because it's legal doesn't mean that you can be smoking in public and out on the streets with it. But because of the cultural shift and the perception shift, like Justin talked about in the youth, it changes the way people behave. So it's also a major corporate culture shift along with this. This graph represents the number of marijuana businesses compared to McDonald's and Starbucks in Oregon and Colorado. There's more in Oregon than McDonald's or Starbucks, but in Colorado it's more than McDonald's and Starbucks combined. We think about the influence and prevalence of Starbucks in America. So in conclusion, I think we need to continue to educate ourselves as citizens, as communities, as neighborhoods, as families, to talk about this issue and to get real science and to see what the scientific bodies, scientific organizations are saying. And try to help science drive some of these conversations, not just big cannabis corporations. Understand the differences and the implications between legalization, decriminalization. Now, decriminalization means that there's not going to be a serious judicial consequences for someone in possession of a certain amount. That limits the influence of corporatization because it's still illegal, while helping people stay out of jails and get into treatment programs. Also helps to reduce stigma when we decriminalize addiction. We should also be thinking about some of the language that we use with addiction, like abuse. Substance abuse versus substance use disorder. Abuse is a very violent word. Makes people think of crime. Further research is essential to safely extract medicinal properties, to safely distribute this and dispense this, like the products I showed earlier. Here's the site for smart approaches to marijuana. It's called learnaboutsam.org. And to continue to engage in open-minded dialogue. I understand we have different political beliefs, and there's lots of political divides in our country. But if we can have respectful dialogue and look at facts together, we can be informed citizens, and maybe we will ultimately vote differently, but at least we'll have more facts. And finally, compassion is still the goal. Thank you very much, and I think there'll be time for questions. I appreciate your time.